Well, thanks, Ramu, for putting me in this spot. And thanks, Samira, Junoon, Vaibhav, and all of you who have made this possible. And, of course, thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I do hope I can share something that would be of interest to you. I think when Ramu suggested the interaction, what he primarily had in mind, if I understand him correctly, is that he wanted me to share IIT Bombay's involvement with a new memorial which has just got completed at Dandi. And later, when I was talking with Samira, she suggested that maybe I could include aspects of my own practice in the talk. And there is another project which I had worked on, which is relatively recent, which was to extend the classroom walls from the city of Bombay to Potter's place 3 hours from Bombay in a village setting, where we built a lovely mud hut which serves as a residency for artists. So that was the other project I thought I would include in today's session. So I'll be talking about these two projects today. One is the Dandi Memorial Project, and the other is the Anvi Artist Residency. I had to link the two. I thought I would play on the word march, because the Dandi march, when Gandhi selected salt as a metaphor for the march, a lot of people, his friends, thought it was not a very appropriate choice, perhaps. They felt that it would not really achieve anything at all. But Gandhi trusted his instinct and went against the advice that he got from most people in this regard. And we now know that the choice of using salt to oppose a very unjust tax had tremendous repercussions on the independence movement. And some of what I do as my own practice in my own teaching and as an inclination is to understand what is the relevance of handcrafts today in times where we are witnessing a sharp decline in many things which are practiced by hand, by people whom we call as craftspeople. What is the relevance today, and does it have any value for future societies, is a question which has been of interest. And in some sense, it is another kind of a march against the predominant current, which is towards artificial intelligence and so on. So I thought I would link the two in that manner. And I also borrow from this Japanese idea of a fish which swims upstream, symbolizing, it is at times perhaps important to try and overcome what might seem an obstacle for something that you perhaps have a hunch about or believe in. And that's a brief explanation about the title of today's talk, Marching Against the Currents. I would think that the 1930 Dandi March was quite against what people would have thought at that time about such opposition. And this interest in the handmade is also a similar movement against the mechanical, the industrial, and so on. So that's the first part of the talk, where it's also called as the National Salt Satyagraha Memorial. And that's the second part of the talk, which is about the Anvi Artist Residency. Okay, I'll just share a few archival images of the 1930 march to begin with. I think 12th March is in fact the 1930 is the date on which Gandhi set out from Sabarmati, and they walked a distance of 241 miles, stopping at villages on the route to Dandi over 24 days. There were 80 people who accompanied Gandhi. The oldest was Gandhi himself. He was about 62. And the youngest was about 16. We have a list of the names of all the people who marched with Gandhi. but we don't have one-to-one mapping of the faces that you see here with all the names. We know some of them, about 20 or so. The other 60, we just have the names, but we don't have the mapping. So when the memorial was being conceived, a little bit of the history of that, I think in 2005, Tushar Gandhi, the great-grandson of the Mahatma, he undertook a march from Sabarmati to Dandi, and he felt that it was important perhaps to create a memorial for the marchers. There are many memorials for Gandhi, but there was nothing for the marchers, so he felt it would be nice to create a memorial for the marchers at the Dandi site. And he spoke about this idea to the government then, Manmohan Singh's government, and they agreed to support this idea. And that's how the project started in 2005. Gopal Krishna Gandhi was appointed the initial chairperson of this project, and there was a team that was set up which included artists. I think Krishnan Khanna was involved, Rajiv Sethi was involved, and at some point Ratika Katt was also involved. But for some reason or the other, they couldn't agree on what exactly the memorial should be like, and the project didn't see the light of the day till, it wasn't going anywhere till about 2010 for, reasons that are technical. The project came to IIT Bombay. They wanted the project to be a zero energy project. That's to say they wanted to generate the energy using solar panels. And that's how IIT Bombay was approached. And Professor Vasi, who is a professor at IIT, who has been researching in the area of renewables, he got involved. And it turned out that Professor Kirti Trivedi, who also comes from a Gandhian family, who's also a professor at IIT, took the opportunity to restart the conceptualization of the memorial. He felt that a collaborative process would be good, so schools, art colleges, artists were invited for a series of discussions as to what should be the nature of this memorial. I think initially Gopal Krishna Gandhi had given broad guidelines saying it should perhaps be along the lines of a Zen garden, nothing very fancy, and so on. But there was also this idea of having something monumental, which is normally something tall, something high. And that was critiqued by a lot of the younger artists who felt that a memorial should not be like, particularly for Gandhi, should be understated and so on. So finally, this tall structure does appear in the final memorial, but it's scaled down quite a lot. And it is through such a process that it was felt that the memorial would have some components, and some of it was also Professor Trivedi's own conceptualization. I'll share those initial sketches. But the sculptors who made the marches, the memorial has the statues of all the 80 marchers, had used some of these archival photographs and video for their references to create the statues of the marchers. That's an iconic image of Gandhi picking up, well, not salt exactly, but mud in which there was a little bit of salt. The British had tried to remove any salt which was there so that there was no way that he could break the law, but so he was picking up at the Dandi beach a fistful of mud with little salt in it. That's an image of the marchers crossing the Narmada on a boat. So that's the list of marchers from Young India. Many of them were people who were living in the ashram at Sabarmati. A lot of them were spinners, weavers working in khadi. So this list is from the Young India that Gandhi used to publish. So share some images of some of the people who initiated the process. That's Professor Trivedi in the studio working for the project. On the left is Sudarshan Iyengar, former Vice Chancellor of Gujarat Vidyapeeth, and Tushar Gandhi, and the director of IIT Bombay. They were a part of a committee which was called as the High-Level Dandi Committee, which was an advisory committee for the whole project. Deena Patel and Shreya Guha from the Ministry of Culture, which supported the project. And there were several meetings at IIT, this one is at Kocharav Ashram. That's Tushar Gandhi with a team of artists who made the murals for the memorial. We'll come to that. On the right is Shanti Swarupini, who's the leader for the mural sculptures. And these are some of the meetings at the site. That's Dandi Beach. And the memorial is very close to the beach. And that is initial plan for the memorial. It envisaged the blue patch in this. It's about 15 acres of land, which has a lake in the middle there, which is symbolic of the sea, which is alongside. And the pathway along the lake is symbolic of the entire route from Sabarmati to Dandi. Along the pathway, there are narrative murals depicting themes from the march, where people used to stop in the villages and interact with them. And then it ends with the 80 statues of the marchers led by Gandhi, after which there's a main larger statue of Gandhi, around which is a salt crystal tower that's about 40 meters, about a little more than 100 feet high, with a symbolic, which symbolizes a pair of hands holding a salt crystal. And then these are some initial artist renderings of what the site would eventually look like. And what was very interesting is the actual, the site in reality, now that it's executed, looks pretty much close to what was envisaged. And it was very interesting to see all the components slowly come alive. So those are the murals which were along the pathway. And in the background is the salt crystal tower, which symbolizes the pair of hands holding a crystal of salt. And I will show you footage of the actual site now that it's completed, and it's pretty close to the renderings which were done initially. There are laser lights all around the main statue, which form a pyramid of light. And that was again rendering done in the preliminary stages of the project. This is the existing sculpture at Dandi. This has been there for many years at Dandi, and the site is right in front of this. The new site, which is about 15 acres big, is right in front of this. And that's the place where the marchers rested after they completed their march at Dandi. It's a building called as the Saifi Villa, which is at the Dandi site. And it was quite a coincidence that this building belonged to a person who happened to be related to Professor Vasi, who gifted it to Gandhiji for them so that they could rest. And that connection was quite interesting. Professor Vasi was the person who designed the solar panels for the entire memorial. So in 2011, when IIT Bombay got involved, there was a workshop. There were 2 workshops which were organized for the creation of the statues of the marchers. There were about 40 artists and sculptors from India and abroad who participated in these workshops. Each of them made about 2 sculptures, which were done initially in clay. And later the marchers were cast in metal and silicon bronze in Jaipur, where Thomas runs the studio called Studio Sukruti. So there are these 80 statues of the marchers being led by Gandhi. That's at the studio in Jaipur. And those are the workers doing the molds for the casting, pouring of the metal, the welding and the grinding. Followed by a patination process. The main statue of Gandhi was made by Sadashiv Sathe, a Bombay-based sculptor. That's him standing in the center. And that's the statue being installed finally at the Dandi site. Professor Trivedi, with a team of artists in Kerala, doing the initial work for the narrative murals, which were initially conceptualized in stoneware, but later executed finally in silicon bronze again. And the team traveled along the route from Sabarmati to Dandi to understand the vegetation, the landscape, guided by the HLDMC, starting from Ahmedabad and making halts at various places in contemporary Gujarat. But though some of the landscape is clearly contemporary and new, there are some structures which are quite similar to those that existed during the time of the march, which served as a valuable reference for all the artists making the murals. That's the Mahi River, the mouth of the Mahi River, which is very, very wide, which is one of the rivers that the marchers crossed as they marched. That's contemporary Gujarat again. And there were initially sketches done for the narrative murals, depicting themes from the march. And the sculptors often enacted some parts of that to get a better understanding of form and anatomy. And you see that taking shape in clay at Hyderabad. The work was done at the Jawaharlal Nehru Fine Arts and Architecture College in Hyderabad. There were 24 of these narrative murals, done over a period of 3 years actually. Very demanding effort, and the perseverance of Shanti, the leader of the group of artists, was indeed amazing. And you see them do the high relief sculptures, murals, depicting. This is clay. This is clay. So after the clay work, all these are clay murals. So this one on the left has Pandit Khare leading a bhajan, and on the right, I think it's an old lady blessing Gandhi. I don't remember the. This one is the start of the march at Sabarmati. Again, this is a river crossing. There are many streams and rivers that the marchers crossed. All these are in clay. And then the sculptors had to go and recreate. From the clay, there were rubber molds that were made, and then you have to do the wax models, and using the lost wax process, you make them in bronze metal. That's the team. And the murals were supported on rock with grooves cut on them. So that's Andhra Pradesh Kupam, from which big blocks of stone are being cut to serve as pedestals for the mural. And in some sense, it was a pan-India project. There were people in Jaipur involved, people in Andhra, Hyderabad, Bombay. That's the cutting of the pedestals and the final installation at the site. So that's the mural pedestal, and you can see the people trying to install a mural in that groove there. And that's an aerial view of the actual site. On the left, what you see are the solar panels which generate the energy. In the middle is the lake, and on the right corner you see the salt crystal tower. The lake, the bottom of the lake had to be impervious, and should not, such so that the water didn't seep through. So professors from the civil engineering department were involved in that. And this project required inputs from diverse departments, the metallurgy department, the earth science department, and it was, and the design department, of course, and it was a rare opportunity for such a collaborative work to happen. These are the solar trees on which the solar panels are mounted. There are about 40 of them, 41 of them, to generate the energy needs for the project. The sea is about 1 kilometer from here, and there was, when the source of water was being discussed, there were alternate sources which were discussed. Getting water from the sea and desalinating it would have been far more expensive a proposition. In fact, there was a lot of reservation about the lake because it was not, Dandi is a very dry area, and it was not very clear where water would come from. But eventually it was, the water is pumped out from, is groundwater, saline groundwater, which is not potable. And that's what has been used to fill up the lake. That was far less expensive than getting it from the sea. Though of course the question of drinking water remains. It has not yet been addressed. We need to have some source of drink, because I understand the number of visitors is quite large. And today we have things like reverse osmosis technologies which can possibly treat the water at the site and make some drinking water available. But seawater was considered, but it was a rather expensive proposition. So at the moment, that's not on the cards. So.
What was the need of solar panels, so many solar panels?
Well, I guess you calculate the total energy requirement. There is lighting and pumping, and there is another energy requirement. I'll come to that. So they calculated the total energy requirement, and based on that, they arrived at the number of panels that would be needed. So in the daytime, the energy goes into the grid, and night they take the energy from the grid. Yes, it's a sustainable, what they call as a zero energy project. Yeah. So those are the making of the solar trees. And the project was executed by a local Navsari-based construction company, which actually, when the tendering process happened, had they had quoted rather low, because they were very keen to do the project. And well, it turned out that they were really committed people, and I understand they incurred a fair amount of loss in all of this, but they have done a reasonably good job of executing things. There was a lot of concern about how the CPWD would execute such a project, because it's an unusual project for CPWD. But I think even CPWD did a tremendous job of supervising and monitoring things very well. And the construction company and the owners were very involved with the whole project. And somehow towards the end, when it seemed just not possible to complete, we were given an ultimatum towards the end. They somehow managed to pull off a rather miraculous feat and completed the project in time, more or less. Those are huge cranes lifting the salt tower up. So there are technical and engineering components in the projects where there was testing required for stability, structural strength, and I think IIT Kanpur played a role in the wind tunnel tests and so on. And that's the A pillar coming up, the salt crystal tower called the A pillar. That's the pathway being built. And there is this welcome center, which has a small exhibition space, which is done very interestingly, which has contributions again from artists from all over the world, in some way responding to the march and the marchers. There are about 8 or 10. There's, for example, a micro sculpture done by a Andhra Pradesh-based artist, which has to be viewed through a microscope. It's a Dandi march done on a very miniature scale. And alongside it, I think there is a photograph of Gandhi peering through the microscope and so on. So it's been quite nicely conceptualized, the exhibition space. There is Thomas Weber, who wrote the book on the Salt March, who has contributed to the text for the exhibition space. On the outer wall there's a mural which was done by Bombay-based artist Amitesh, who in fact worked at our department to create, you can't see it very clearly, but those little, wave-like form on the wall are, they're like leaf-like forms and natural shapes, which was his interpretation of what the marchers might have walked upon as they traversed the path from Sabarmati to Dandi. It was not a literal translation of the march in any way, a more contemporary interpretation, but also done to give the blank, stark wall a little more of an organic touch. Yeah, that's what close-up looks like. The space is called 241, the exhibition space, alluding to the number of miles that the people walked, that the marchers walked. 241 miles is the distance that they traversed. And there is another interesting activity at the memorial, which is pots inside which there's a heater into which you can pour some local saline water and boil it and make salt. And the pots were made at, incidentally, part of some of them were made at the Anvi artist residency, which I shall talk about later. That's Sandeep working on one of the salt pots. And that is what the salt baking pots look like. Some initial experiments. So there's a pan on the top, and you pour saline water on it and switch it on. And in 5 minutes, you make a small amount of salt. Ramu, I got a small bottle of salt for you, made by the Prime Minister. You could perhaps sell it for a lot of money. And okay, so that's 15 acres of land. You're talking of the area of the memorial? Yeah, that's about. Yeah, so that's about 15 acres. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a. Yeah, it's quite a big. But going by project costs, if you want, I can share some details. The total sanction amount was about 70 crores. Which is insignificant compared to, let's say, the Patel Memorial, which was over 3,000 crores in some sense.
Definitely.
So, as a colleague who often used to joke that perhaps 10 flats in Bombay is the cost of the project, So,
and this has turned out to be very good. I mean, looking overall project is, marvelously done.
I would invite you to certainly visit, and we would love to know your.
I would love to.
Yeah, opinion on. I must say that for me, interesting thing was to see the thing go from the design on the paper to actual manifestation, and more or less, it kind of lived up to what had been visualized. So whether you like it or not, well, that's a different matter. But in terms of accuracy of translating a design into reality, I thought it was a job well done. My job was actually more of that than any creative. For me, sorry.
Any external consultants were sourced from?
Yes, we had support of various kinds. The detailed architectural drawings were done by a Bombay-based architect firm, Sandeep Shirke.
Okay.
Yes, and they had again structural consultants and lighting consultants and so on.
Especially the houses are, they are very typical to that era.
Yes.
The roof and all.
That's right. In fact, the work that Charles Correa had done at Sabarmati is very beautiful. The new memorial. So again, that takes from the quarters at Sabarmati and tries to keep that simplicity.
That is the exact replica of how Gandhiji stayed in his during his life in Sabarmati.
Right. Yes. The salt.
The whole area which says
Oh no! I'm sorry. That kind of misleading. that area is actually, on the site, there are no salt pans anymore at Dandi. At some point there used to be some salt pans, but now the nearest ones I think are Dharasana, which is about 40 miles away, I think. So those are, that's some drawing which are not salt pans. It's misleading in this particular picture. Yeah.
And the other thing I was curious about is why was it decided to have the lake as a central, like what was the thinking behind having the lake as a central space?
Lake as a center?
Yeah, like why a lake?
Well, no, I did mention it. I think Professor Trivedi wanted to symbolize the sea, which is alongside. So the lake symbolizes the sea in some sense, and the path is the path from Sabarmati to Dandi. So it's along the sea. So that's what he had in mind, perhaps. But I have since I was visiting the site fairly often during the implementation. What made a tremendous difference is when the lake was filled with water. So the presence of such a largish body of water is quite dramatic. I mean, I think we are water creatures, I guess, fundamentally. 90% of our bodies are water, so we respond very well to water. So you could see the smile on all the faces of the workers after the water was filled in. So I don't know what the idea that Professor Trivedi had in mind was to symbolize the sea, perhaps. But I think, when the lake was filled with water in such a dry, barren place, just to have a body of water was nice and inviting. It makes the memorial kind of come alive. Though it's not a strong, art element in some sense. One would think of the marchers or the murals as the significant art elements, but water, I think, has a very central role in how the memorial appears now. So that's about the lake. Okay, so
What are they doing with the Saifi villa now? Are they going to restore some of the archival material?
yes, Saifi Villa actually comes under the Archaeological Survey of India, and they had restored it somewhat. It was in rather bad shape at some point. Tushar Gandhi is very keen that one rethinks those spaces also, maybe partly have some kind of interactive display, perhaps, I don't know, make it more interesting for the visitor. Right now it just has two floors, there's a ground floor and a first floor, and there are some photographs and some, I think the metal kadhais in which salt was made, I think some of them are there. That's all it has now. So there is a suggestion to integrate it with this and make the space more interesting.
Can you just tell us how do we get to Dandi?
Oh yes. So
Other than walking.
yes, yeah, that's a good one. Well, initially our trips used to be by road, but later I figured that the best way to get to Dandi is actually to take the intercity Surat Express, which leaves Bandra at 6:50, Andheri at 7:05, I think, and gets you to Navsari by 10:30, and you can take a local auto, and in half an hour you are at the site. But I presume the Gujarat government will now run buses perhaps from the station at Navsari. Navsari is the closest railhead. You can also get to Dandi from Surat, which is about an hour from Dandi. So that's... I missed out a couple of photographs when I was talking to the people who... for me, actually one of the most moving sights was to see, people who actually toil to make the memorial come alive. I mean, doing the design is one thing, but actually when you have to carry stone, break stone, plant grass, the hard work which is done by lots of people from all over India, the labor teams, so to speak, I must say one needs to salute them and hats off to them for the tremendous... It's very hot in Dandi most times, and so that's a person breaking the rocks for making the mural pedestals, and these are people laying stones for the pathway. And the CPWD did its own documentation, which I chanced upon, and some of the faces there were remarkable. So I just picked up some of the photographs from their archival, from their data, and these are some of those people who toil to make the memorial a reality. Okay, so I think that's the first part of the talk. If there are more questions, I could take them, or I could respond to questions later. Before I... Sure.
Was there any competition done before this project started, like initially?
Competition?
Yeah, for the layout of, for...
No, I think from 2005 to 2010, the ministry had appointed this committee which had artists on it and Gandhians, and they, on their own initiative, must have spoken to people they thought who could do the design. But for some reason, that was not working out. I'm not familiar with the details of what happened in those years. When IIT Bombay got involved, like I said, Professor Trivedi did invite art colleges and artists to a series of discussions in which various ideas were sought. So there was no formal announcement, I think, of inviting entries from all over, like in a public announcement. But to the extent possible, he did speak to various people. So
basically the idea was to create those statue murals and
yes,
for that. So must be, that that acres of land must not have been previously decided, but then they must have enlarged that scope of work. That is what I'm feeling.
The area of the memorial, I think that had been decided. We did not decide the area for the memorial.
Okay.
That was given
But
when we started.
Actually, this was a state government initiative.
No, it was an initiative of the Ministry of Culture, Government of India.
Ministry of Culture.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine.
Yeah. I've been teaching in the design college at IIT Bombay for about 18 years now. And I guess, after several years of being there, I did feel jaded in the sense that things do become a routine. And for me, it was important to reinvent myself, revitalize myself. And at some point, this friend who's a potter, who was also a Bombay-based potter, who was looking for creating a studio outside the city, managed to get some land in this village near Mangaon on the Bombay-Goa, off the Bombay-Goa highway. Indapur, Mangaon, Mahad, that area. And once he got the land, I used to visit him, and he slowly built his studio. And I have another friend who is based in Shantiniketan, outside Shantiniketan, Vidyut Roy, who is also an artist, who builds these very lovely structures with local materials, mud, bamboo, and so on. And their own studio outside Shantiniketan is a very lovely space. When I visited that, it's, if I may, choose an object which may describe what that space is like. A bean bag is perhaps a good object, because if you sit and kind of push yourself, and it would make dents and corners, their house is like that. It's almost got a very organic, natural look to that house. It is a lovely place, and I used to really enjoy my visits there. And Vidyut got to be a good friend, and at some point he visited Sandeep's studio in Wighavali. And we were talking about possibility of creating a similar mud hut structure, which would serve to extend our classroom walls from the city of Bombay to a very different reality nearby, with the idea that we could take students there for an occasional exposure. And that's the idea which led to the creation of this space. We were talking about this for maybe 3 years before it actually happened. And that's the Mandovi Express to Mangaon. And that's what Wighavali looks like. It's lovely. I mean, the moment you get out of Kalyan and past Panvel, you kind of begin to feel lighter and so on. The spaces are such that they start healing you the moment you get. And looking at rice fields of this kind, does wonders to all of us, I guess. So that's rice at Wighavali, and it's very, very lovely in the monsoon in Treen. Just walking around, watching leaves is a wonderful experience. And the Mangaon is one of the railheads. Indapur is the other railhead near Wighavali. It's a single track after Roha. It's a single track on the Konkan Railway, though now they are expanding and now they're putting a second track there. And one person you might have heard of is Rajesh Kulkarni, another potter who lives near Indapur, who runs a lovely pottery and employs local people. They work with finely sieved terracotta to make very lovely pottery ware. And I used to visit Rajesh for a few years and was very inspired by his initiative. And there are in fact a small group of about 4 or 5 potters who have come around in that belt, Raigad district of Maharashtra. In fact, Alibag, of course, has several. There was Perrin and Raleigh to begin with, and then now, of course, Anjani and several others. Alibag has a lot of potters, and now Sandeep and Rajesh there. So Rajesh was quite an inspiring person when we were initially thinking of building the place at Wighavali, and that's the village actually in Wighavali, which is about 1 kilometer from the pottery. I would think about 100 hutments or so. And the thing is, these villages are mostly now peopled by the elderly and the very young. The able people, well, they migrate to the nearby Nagothana or Thana or Bombay in search of livelihood. So one of the, I guess, the not so nice thing about contemporary reality is there's no cultural life in our villages, And therefore, quite understandably, they are no longer places which attract the young, And in that sense, I've always, someone a few days back asked me if I was a Gandhian, and I said, no, maybe I don't really belong to that generation who can lay claims to be a Gandhian. But one idea of Gandhi, which I always responded to quite strongly, was his notion that maybe we should have grown our villages first in some way, or alongside our cities. Well, it's a rather difficult proposition, and I don't think it's an easy one at all. But that question is of interest. It's not like giving farm loan waivers. I think that's really, not just the only way. One needs to have a more organic, actually, what we get from the village. It's not that we are people who will give back waivers and so on. And if at all it's possible to create a new definition of what culture means by engaging more. And this experiment is just a very modest step in that direction. So just to take students there, and every time I take students there, it's very reassuring to see how the young respond. I don't know if those 2 people came today. There were 2 people. Oh, there Samath is there. Hi, Samath. Yes, so he can share his response to the village yesterday. But that was one of the ideas behind, that's Vidyut taking a walk in the village, taking a look at what local materials have been used. He always borrows from what is local. And those are some of the traditional huts that you would see there. Though soon they are giving way to concrete structures with tin roofs, and whether it's Maharashtra, whether it's Orissa, whether it's Himachal Pradesh, this change of this architecture is rather crazy. Because there are local materials. For example, the house that we made, I think doesn't have, it is not maintenance free. It requires maintenance. There's no such thing perhaps as maintenance free when you work with bamboo and mud. But that is a part of keeping a house alive perhaps. And it is possible to use local materials like bamboo, and in fact potter for the tiles for the hut, I'll come to that when I show you images, were made by a potter in Orissa. That it was a tradition to make roof tiles using half cylinders, which has disappeared now altogether with new building materials. And some images of Vidyut's work from other places. He's not an architect, and maybe that's why he perhaps succeeds in creating these very lovely space. He's not schooled in that sense and approaches it in a very painterly manner. He studied to be a mural artist, and since it was difficult to get walls, he said, maybe why don't I not make my own walls, and then that becomes perhaps a part of the mural. And these are some of the lovely structures that he has created, and that's Vidyut at Wighavali. We are looking at the land around, wondering where to build, and initially there were some models that we made at the studio here. That was an initial model, and it was a 2-storied structure, but we departed from that because this was turning out to be more expensive than we could. And if you notice the model, the walls of the model, there are these black and white shapes there, which are, which is what Vidyut does when he's not doing anything. He has these tiny little notebooks and a ball pen, and he's squiggling these things on them. And there are lots of them that he has got filled, And in a sense, later he used this thing in the mural that he eventually painted. And he works with a small team of tribal boys at Santhal boys who live where he stays. He stays with them, actually. He's almost a part of that community. So they came to the site, 7 of them, stayed there for 3 months at Wighavali. They used to clamber up the local hill, cut the bamboo, get it for the roof construction, make the furniture, get mud, and create the home. So that's some of the tribal team that Vidyut works with, Santhal people who made the hut. That's the bamboo structure for the roof. On the right is Sandeep. I'm in the middle, and Vidyut is on the left here. So that's him painting the mural, the same black and white pattern that you saw. And he does attribute some degree of influence to KG, with whom he had an association when KG Subramaniam was in Shantiniketan. And before he began the mural, he said he was quite nervous. He didn't know what to do. And then finally he said, okay, I'll go ahead and continue what I do on those tiny little notebooks on the larger walls. And after he finished it, he said, Guru abhi dekhe, khush ho gaye shayad. So, one day there were these holes in the wall through which the sunlight was coming in and casting some shadows, and he got an idea to make these lattice jali from those shadow forms. This was not there in the original plan. And the tiles that you see are the traditional roof tiles made by potters. Unfortunately, we don't get them in Maharashtra anymore. We had to get them done at Orissa, some 50,000 of them. You have these able-bodied potters who stand and turn the wheel and throw 1,000 cylinders a day, cut it into halves, and you have the roof tiles there. And some of these tiles have, that's the residency. It's got very lovely verandas and spaces to sit. These are students sitting and reading. That's Vidyut. He has used the people leaf sandwiched between glasses on the windows and on the doors. And some of the roof tiles have animal forms on them, monkeys and birds. And these are doorknobs which were made by students. Each doorknob is hand-shaped and handcrafted. And the paper around the lampshade is also made by hand by Anupam, who's another artist in Calcutta who makes lovely paper. So much of this structure is handmade. And in fact, the bed sheet is also hand woven. I have been involved in handloom weaving in recent times, so that's also a hand done thing. And I would invite you, a part of the intent behind today's talk was to invite all those who might be interested in spending time there to go and energize this space in some manner that you feel befitting. It would be great if there could be a theatre performance or a puppetry performance or a singing, I don't know what, or if you just wish to go and write in seclusion or paint in seclusion, you're most welcome to use the residency. It does require maintenance, and we have a local person who comes and helps us do the floors once in a while. Oh, it's like in Bombay terms, it's a 1 BHK with a lovely veranda. You know, so, and there is lots of whatever land all around it, of course. So, and Sandeep, who actually owns the place, he has dormitories for his own students. So there are more rooms. And I hear that he now has AC, because most people need AC, I'm told. So, last January, we had an Australian ceramic artist, Greg Daly, a very well-known artist and teacher, who came and did a lovely workshop in glaze and color development. So that's Greg Daly at Wighavali with potters, and he's also a master in luster firing, and that's the group which did the Greg Daly workshop. That's Greg Daly planting a tree in. And students who have accompanied me have also done a little bit of planting. I think here they're planting what's called as chowli after the rice crop. And I was there yesterday actually, and this time they had a field full of watermelons. You know, there are 200 watermelons that we saw yesterday. And of course, you know, when we were doing the glaze workshop, well, we were asked to just walk around and look at the colors that you see around the thing, and then see if you can try and get some of that in your glazes. That was a lovely experiment. Was it? That's a shadow puppetry performance, not at Wighavali, but been planning to do something. Students who had come there for a week-long stay interacted with the children in the local school, and there's a short video on that.
It was called monster snake. It lived in different parts of the world's oceans at different times. वर्ल्ड में कितना ओशन है? बहुत सारा है ना? बहुत सारा पानी है. ये जो मॉन्स्टर स्लिक है, वो अलग-अलग समुद्र में अलग-अलग टाइम पे रहता है. कभी ये समुद्र में, कभी वो समुद्र में, कभी इधर, कभी यहाँ, कभी उधर. लेकिन वो सब जगह अलग-अलग टाइम पे अलग-अलग जगहों पे रहता है. Will save the world one day. तुम और तुम्हारा छाता इस दुनिया को एक दिन बचाएगा.
So this was some video that the students have put together. Well, I guess I'm out of, just finished my allotted time, and I'll stop here, I guess. So.
The question that I have is, what do you hope to, like this artist residency that you've built?
Yep.
Did you, is it something you're watching organically, or is there something that you're hoping to move towards with having built that?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get your
So,
question.
the place you built at Wighavali, what was your desire? What was your dream when you built that space?
Well, one very clear thing which is more relevant to our own programs was to be able to take students there fairly regularly. Just one, to give them an exposure to begin with of a very different way of life. What modes of engagement we need to have with village communities is not very clear at all to me. And I was hoping that through a series of such interactions, one gets to understand that a little better. I can't lay claims to having made much headway in that area. But I've heard, for example, of certain initiatives in Karnataka, for example, with the IFA programs, where the Kali Kali suit art learning process, where actually they work not so much in urban centers, but in fairly interior parts, in theatre, and mostly in theatre, I think. And that would be of interest perhaps also. If one had to conceive of an art education in such a setup, what would be the nature of such an education? That's of interest, for example. So if there could be monthly meetings also with the local children or the youngsters, film screenings perhaps, discussions, that would be of interest. So that's the second part. One is an exposure for our own students, and second is some mode of engagement with the local community, which I think also is a very important part underlying this.
So you showed us in your video the graduate students sort of doing some kind of teaching or sharing with the children.
Right.
Has anything happened the other way, where your students are actually learning from somebody in the village community, the larger community? So they
No.
become the students or the...
No, what happens when typically there's an elective course for which, let's say, about 5 or 8 students sign up, and they're encouraged to go spend a week there, mostly by themselves. There's very little teaching which happens in this, and they are encouraged to go walk around in the village, speak to the people, make friends. So that is the level of the other way. But I don't think we have yet understood or set up any regular formal modes of a two-way process really at all.
The reason I'm asking you is, it struck me when I was watching a Tijan Bai show about 15, 20 years ago in Calcutta, and she had been sent by Spikmake to perform in schools and stuff. And you have many artists. You have Rashid Khan also going through Spikmake, and you have Tijan Bai also going through Spikmake. And what really struck me is post the artist conversation, post the artist performance, the students are free to meet the artist and chat with them. And what really struck me at the Tijan Bai performance is how people didn't know how to talk to her. You could see that people had loved her performance, that these are urban youngsters, and that they wanted to engage, but it was almost like they didn't know how to have that conversation. And I wonder sometimes if what are the modes with which we can start opening out those spaces of conversation. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's weird because when I'd seen it with classical artists or whatever, there didn't seem to be that problem. There was a presumption that we spoke the same language, like I'm speaking to you right now. And somehow with Tijan Bai, even though they had loved the performance, they didn't know how to start a conversation with her.
Well, I'm not very sure yet if I really understood the difficult question that you're trying to raise, if you may.
I think culturally, I guess I'm coming from a place where culturally I feel that we are so schooled in the way we talk to different people. So even in the city of Bombay, when you're talking to different classes or different communities, there are certain assumptions about your place in the power structures, right?
Correct.
Which means that you don't know how to talk outside of that.
Correct.
So if you're looking for a sharing, my presumption is that you're looking for some platform of equality where you can maybe equality is not the right word, I don't know, but some platform where there can be a back and forth. And if your cultural training is such that you don't know how to have a back and forth with groups of people viewed as other, that you can respect their art, or you can respect the way they live, or you can respect their villages, but you don't know how to have that conversation, then what training or what ways can people start learning how to have that conversation so that it's not top down or how do you have person-to-person conversations when your cultural training has sort of schooled you not to have that?
Well, I'm still not, but I would think that the only way perhaps to enable any such thing which is, well, more equal, or at least would be a more prolonged association over time. I mean, as of today, even though I make a visit once a month, it's rather short to begin such a process. So I'm not very clear as to how, in fact, to proceed on this front. I go once a month, at times for a day, at times for an overnight stay, and at times for slightly longer stays. So it is not really easy to understand how to set up an interaction, it's one of the things that I do, well, lose sleep over, but I don't have any clues really, So I would invite those that might be interested to, well, help and join in the process and throw some light if you may, and so on. Well, interestingly, a process which I have been observing, which was not a designed kind of an engagement, is the interaction between a local person, a boy who is maybe in his mid-20s, who learned pottery, and Sandeep, who is from Bombay, who has set up his own studio. Now, this person has his own separate studio, and there is some regular chat which goes on between the two of them. So I guess that's a more natural exchange than one that is more designed in any way. Though what exactly is happening there, one would again be able to understand over time only. So what's the nature of give and take there? I would think that actually in some sense we are so problematic, our own societal structures, that it's not possible to create more meaningful structures in the near future. I think it's only firstly, I guess, like I say, the privileging of the mental is so much in our society that unless that changes in some way, we can't really have structures where we can explore a more equal exchange.
Yeah. Yeah, I come from, my name is Ganesh, I come from Rameshwaram, southern part of India. And where near Rameshwaram we have one district called Shivganga district, which is very close to Rameshwaram. It was divided as Shivganga district, close to Madurai. And where we have a village, very big, there are 76 villages called Karekudi, which have got mansions. Every individual's house is like a mansion, like a Rajasthani Haveli type. See, what you have showed me something now presently where somebody with a new creative idea come up, design it with the local made resources. But in the long run, what is the leadership guidance? When a person comes out with an interest presently, it is manageable. So long run is the biggest question mark in maintaining those things. In my place where each and every house is around 20,000 square feet, where it is made out of local made materials, paintings, more than 100-year-old, imported from Europe, Spain, oldest equipment, tiles from Burma, Vietnam, Hanoi. Those oldest buildings look excellent with the local made, imported British styles, European styles, all of it. Many Europeans, tourists and Americans come and visit those 76 villages, and they have been designated as an UNESCO heritage site. Anybody can put on a website, Chettinad houses. P. Chidambaram comes from that village only. So my thing is now many of those houses, which are more than 20,000 square, like palaces, they are getting demolished. Very intricate architecture is demolished because due to lack of maintenance. People are not interested, means the next generation of people. They were all mostly jamindars. So how to create an awareness, which is it's a very rich collection. Gandhiji has several times visited those villages. Each and every house he has visited and he has given a lot of information. But in the latest trend is very, even French government has come and has adopted some of the villages. They have renovated it. But still the demolition is in a faster pace. The younger generation, they just do not have the capacity to maintain it. They demolish, they just build their own, the latest model of houses and all that. Yeah, so what is any step have been taken by the Artists Association to go there, create any awareness among the locals, so that such a beautiful architecture, art and architecture could not be demolished. And to the long run, it can showcase as a pride to the nation. Because it also involves a lot of architecture. What is the Architecture Association taking up to make awareness to those people as well as the local population to protect those beautiful monuments? Because
Which association are you
no,
referring
I'm just
to?
meaning, just tell you in an informal way. Any artists have, people have taken up to do awareness. That is my thing.
No, I actually, I would think that, in times where the pressures for survival kind of negate every other human aspiration which is not measurable, and economics becomes the sole criteria for deciding whether something is worth continuing or not, well, a lot of these things are likely to disappear. I mean, there is little that perhaps it appears that anybody can do, unless there are small groups of people who come maybe from a relative position of privilege to sustain and maintain and fight against the current, as it were, to protect some of these. And I think there are examples of small groups all over the country, though you will find more than sufficient evidence to show what you are saying. Even I was in Andretta, which is a village in Himachal Pradesh, where the old houses, which are lovely houses with a very different architecture of the hills, now they are giving way to concrete structures, So I don't, even in my own father's village in Orissa, because of the new schemes, people want, pakka houses, so to speak, right? So I don't think that there's much we can do about that. The face of the Indian village is going to change, except in some small pockets where interested individual or a group has taken some effort to preserve some part of it. Till as such times when in a collective sense, we value that, but that doesn't seem quite likely in the near future. So we are in for rather drastic changes in,
Hello, my name is Shraddha. I'm a fellow potter. I was the first student when Sandeep sir's residency was built, and I was a spectator how the mud house interestingly was taking shape. And I remember you carrying the bunch of students for the visit and one of the stay. Now starting for this particular conversation, I wanted to know your take about how the handmade stands against the contemporary or utility or material wear, or not specifically the pottery, but overall handmade versus this thing. It may be traditional, it may be contemporary, but through the entire journey of this second part of your presentation, which is the residency, now at this point, what are your say? I want to know your thoughts and like deep observations about how this whole thing is shaping as a visual communication overall, not just pottery or architecture or like sketching and all. So what are your say, or what do you feel, where you stand?
No, I think it will survive. It's not, no matter what changes might happen because of a lot of work being done by machine intelligence or robots or whatever. The handmade will certainly survive. I mean, I don't think. My hunch is that I don't have proof for that. Because at all points, there have been people who have felt this is important to protect and nurture, like Bernard Leach during the times of industrialization in England, brought back the pottery, hand-built pottery tradition. So I'm sure that even in an aspirational society that desires better homes and cars such as ours now, there will be sufficient number of people who will protect certain traditions, though again they will be in pockets to begin with, I guess. So it's not all gloomy. I think there are pockets of light and good struggles going on in whether it's weaving or pottery, or I'm sure even growing organic food and so on. So
I had visited the IDC building during the design degree show, and I think the opposite building had this display of this Dandi memorial being this being constructed, like the what do you say, the model and all that.
Yes.
And there was some description. I was always had this question in the back of the mind, this curiosity as to how an old image probably is used and a 2D image is converted to a 3D. So how two hands are just sculpting it out, making the marchers, because Gandhi's photographs are there everywhere, but the marchers' photographs are just a few. I do not know if the names survive, but does every marcher have a photograph, or was it that way, or just some of the marchers, the photographs were not there, so you just kind of imagined and built? I was curious on that front.
Actually, there is documentation of the process in more detail, so maybe it might be of interest for you to get access to that. So I think whatever reference material was available was archival, like some of the photographs that you saw. And efforts were made to get some reference for each of the marchers. But whether each and every 80 person had a reference, I am not sure.
Reference photo may not have been there.
Yes. Though faces of them do appear, so yeah. Age, we know the age, we know the some aspect of how they looked in.
So I have two questions. How did the name Anvi come up?
Well, that's a name that's chosen by my friend Sandeep.
Okay.
I'm sorry, you'll have to ask him.
Okay.
Yeah.
And being a teenager myself, what steps do you think should be taken to revive this kind of a heritage?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
Being a teenager myself, like being the younger generation, what steps do you think should be taken by us so that this heritage can be maintained?
I'll use an answer which a classical singer gave to a young person who asked such a question. In that case, it was how to preserve singing, and he said, why don't you learn how to sing? So I would think that you should learn how to do something that you enjoy with your own hands, and that will ensure,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sir, regarding that Dandi project, a real question came up in my mind, because what you had discussed was CPWD was there, civil engineering department was there, a consultant was there. So what was the inputs from the design department into that, sir? Because you are from the design department, right, sir?
Yeah.
So what were the inputs from the design department, sir?
No, well, the design was more or less finalized. Like I showed some of the renderings, there were sketches and renderings which were done, which established what's called as, the look and feel of the site. That was done to the last detail. So the role of the CPWD was more in technical sense to translate what was designed to the real manifestation, So the design...
Implementation was done by them. This whole ideation was done
by the design department, that's right. Yeah.
Sir, just a clarification. Just a doubt I want to clear.
Sure.
When the project was started, so in between you said that there is a Sefi villa coming in between that building you showed. What was the importance during that time of that building?
It belonged to one of the Bohra community persons, and it was their personal property. Yeah. And
did Gandhiji stop there?
Yes. So after it was donated, he actually rested in that building.
He rested in
Yes,
it.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now the idea is to convert into some kind of a memorial or...
That has always been, after that it was given over to the Archaeological Survey of India.
Yeah.
So
okay, fine,
so.
sir. Thank you.
Sir, when was the first time you handled mud and the rotating wheel and the journey so far?
When was the first time I handled mud?
Yeah, and the pot.
I remember when I was a student, we had a ceramic studio in our department, but it was defunct. It was not in the working order. But there was one wheel which was kind of working, and there was another friend who used to know pottery, and she had given me a demo. So that was the first time I remember in the late 80s when I first tried my hand at pottery. But it is much later that I actually took it up more seriously. So, yeah, nearly 12 years, 13 years later. Yeah.
this last slides which you're showing of the Wighavali village, the houses which were constructed by the artist, was that it was a kind of a prototype to show the villagers that...
No.
Or it was an experiment?
No, I mean, Vidyut would be the last person to show, to make such a claim, because Vidyut, interestingly, he is a student of the Government Art College, Calcutta. And then after that, he wanted to study at Shantiniketan, but never got around to studying at Shantiniketan. But he settled down outside Shantiniketan with the Santals. He didn't have any money. So he just went and started, they gave him some small room somewhere, and he started staying with the Santal villagers. And they almost adopted him as a part of their extended family. And then he tells me that after he got married and he made some money by selling his work, etc., he made his own house. And some of the boys who are now part of his team, he has held them as babies, he says, So he's that close to them. I must share with you an interesting, anecdote. For example, these people who are working for making the house, unlike construction laborers who get more or less dehumanized when they are making these massive structures, these people at the end of the day, they used to play the flute, they used to cook their food, and they were very, very wonderful life also. The enjoyment of life was still there very much.
Absolutely.
For them,
seeing this kind of project, we feel like we should go over there and see that the houses which were made. So now more of the prototype must have come, or it's just one house which has been done. More houses has come up?
No. For it was just one experiment.
It was one experiment.
So a little about the funding for the second house.
Yeah.
I thought I would try what is called as crowdfunding. So I announced it, but it didn't really work. So I was in a dilemma what to do, and then a couple of friends pitched in, and then I put in some of my own savings, and that's how, very modest budgets in that sense. So.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Samira. Thank you.